This past week, President Trump stated that certain Canadian trade practices are a disgrace. He went on to say, in quotes, NAFTA, whether it's Mexico or Canada, is a disaster for our country. It's a disaster. It's a trading disaster. End of quote. The latest catalyst for the outburst is the dispute over what's called ultra-filtered milk. Now, the specifics of that dispute are not that important, but two aspects are. First, it's drawn attention to the bigger issue of Canada's supply management practices and massively high tariff placed on imported milk, yogurt, cheese, eggs, and the like. I mean, Canada's supply management, which you've got to remember, is designed to keep prices artificially high on these products, is why you pay so much more for milk in Canada than the States, as every cross-border shopper knows. Canadians pay an estimated $3.5 billion more per year under supply management. $3 billion of that's for milk alone. It's just like a tax, with the bottom line that the typical household pays the equivalent of $450 per year. Near $600, by the way, if you got children. A price that Canadians' poorest families can least afford. I've talked about that many times in the past, but I know, who cares? The impact on the poor? Well, certainly not the NDP, certainly not the Liberals, Greens, Conservatives, who all support supply management for political purposes. Yes, there are rare exceptions. You could point to the Liberal or former Liberal leadership candidate Martha Hall Findlay or the current Conservative leadership candidate Maxime Bernier, who both want to get rid of the system. But the bottom line is, to the date, the NDP, Liberals, Greens, and Conservatives all support supply management. They all turn a blind eye to the extra costs put on low-income families. Now, who gets that $3.5 billion in additional costs you pay? Well, as University of Calgary economist Trevor Tom points out in the Maclean's, there are just under 11,500 dairy farms in Canada. Well, you can do the math, and that works out to an average of $260,000 per farm. StatsCan estimates that the average annual dairy farming household income is $110,000, compared to the average for all Canadian households, which is about $68,000. And by the way, the average poultry farming household income is about $119,000 per year. The average dairy farmer has a net worth of about $3.7 million. That's as of 2015, while poultry and egg farmers were typically worth about $6 million, which kind of makes it ironic how poor families are transferring money to wealthy farmers. I mean, it's a bit much. But can we simply get rid of supply management? I mean, it'd certainly be better for consumers, as getting rid of any tariff on anything we import is. It would make our trade negotiations easier, given that supply management was a huge sticking point for the Trans-Pacific trade deal. Yes, it is a big problem for the Trump administration, but people forget it was a big problem for the Obama administration before him. But any transition away from supply management has to include financial compensation for dairy farmers. You can't have forced them to buy what's called quota, which dictates the amount they are legally allowed to produce. We force them to buy quota, which is expensive, $40,000 per unit out in BC and Alberta, $24,000 in Quebec and Ontario, and then do away with it. I mean, same goes for egg producers. Anyone else who's been forced to operate under supply management. There's got to be some compensation. In Australia, where their version of supply management was ended, they had an 8-year financial transition payment for farmers, which was paid for by a special levy on milk. And by the way, despite the levy, the milk prices were still lower than they were under the supply management system in Australia. But we got to do something similar here. Make no mistake, getting rid of supply management would be bad news for some of the dairy and poultry farmers. And the payment would be to mitigate some of those financial damages. Now, on the same card, more efficient producers would welcome the change because they'd be able to sell their increased production. In cases like New Zealand and Australia, in the aftermath of eliminating supply management, efficient farms actually thrived. I'm just saying that you cannot force farmers to have paid these quota amounts and then leave them high and dry. There's got to be some sort of financial compensation as you went forward if we indeed eliminate this. I said there was two noteworthy aspects to Mr. Trump's outburst, but here's the other one. I didn't see enough notice of this. The Democrats are on board when it comes to his demands that we eliminate supply management. This week, senior Democratic Senator, and he's the House Minority Leader, Chuck Schumer, stated in quotes, "I welcome President Trump's opposition to Canada's unfair dairy trade barriers, and will fight with him to help New York farmers and reverse this unwise policy," end of quote. I mean, come on, let's face it, there's virtually no areas where President Trump and the Democrats have agreed, but they agree on this one. Both parties want to be seen standing up for farmers, so I don't see this issue just fading away. But as you'd expect, any talk about limiting farm subsidies is far more complicated than we're sort of led on. I think Prime Minister Trudeau was absolutely right when he pointed out the different aspects of agriculture are heavily subsidized throughout the world. I mean, the U.S. spends way more on farm subsidies than Canada does, while the EU is a subsidy fest. I mean, this is one of the big stumbling blocks for developing nations trying to sell their agricultural products into the developed world. We put up these barriers, which, of course, helps keep their standard of living much lower than it needs to be. But here's the thing. Consumers around the world are already paying a heavy price to protect different aspects of farm industry from competition. It's always a major stumbling block when it comes to trade negotiation. All that's happened here is that supply management has come to the forefront when it comes to comparisons between the U.S. and Canada. And it is costing $3.5 billion per year for consumers. I don't think this one's going away, and it shouldn't.